Welcome to another episode of Founders Club. Today we're going to be talking to Jessica Rhodes, who is the founder of Interview Connections, about how you can use podcast appearances to grow your business. We're going to be breaking down exactly how to find good podcasts to be on, how to pitch those podcasts to get on and make an appearance, and how to leverage your appearance to grow your business and generate leads. If you have any questions, put them in the box down below. Make sure you check out all the links in the description. And as always, if you like money and you like real estate, hit that subscribe button because this is the show for you. We'll see you on the inside. Welcome to Founders Club, the show for real estate entrepreneurs. All right, Jessica, welcome to Founders Club.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy to have you on as well. I'm actually really excited to talk to you because I do think that podcasting is a great way for people to get their message out there, to get their brand out there, to generate leads, to generate connections, referrals, all those types of things. So, looking forward to kind of diving into all that. I know that is your expertise, but why don't we just start with, 30,000 foot view of how can guests leverage podcasts to grow their business?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, the first thing I think it's important to kind of set the stage and give context on, first why, and then we'll definitely get into the how in a moment. But right now, people are wanting to consume longer form content. Buyers want to be able to spend a lot of time with you before they make that decision to invest. And when you have long form content online that they can consume, like a podcast that you host or a podcast that you're a guest on, then you give them that content that they can very easily binge through and spend a lot of time with you. And so the way that you can leverage podcast guesting to really grow your business and expand your brand awareness online is number one, consistently show up on other people's podcasts where your target market is listening and where the topic and the content of the podcast is relevant to your areas of expertise. Number two, really leverage your relationship with the host of the show. This is a networking strategy just as much as it is a broadcasting and media strategy. So, when I look at the hundreds of clients that we've booked on podcasts over the last 11 years, the ones that have done the best and had the best ROI are those that have JV partnerships with hosts. They will do more with the host than just the podcast interview is like the initial conversation, it's the first meeting. But then when they really hit it off with a host and there's a lot of synergy, they'll do a JV webinar, they'll do an interview on another podcast. Like they really leverage that connection and that
Yeah.
relationship. And then number three, and then I'll pause.
Wait,
It's
before we go to number three, I just
yeah.
want to say I 100% attest to that because just off me doing this podcast the last few years, like I've had been fortunate to get some really awesome guests. And after the interview's over and before we get a chance to just have some dialogue. And so I've gotten like people's cell phone numbers that I never would have had access to. I've gotten invited to events that I never would have gotten invited to. I've been invited to be partners on deals on things that I never would have gotten into. So 100% agree with that and fully endorse, the using the podcast for networking purposes.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said all because especially in real estate, there has to be a lot of trust. Whether you are, broker owner, you're a realtor, you're investor, you are dealing with large amounts of money. These are major investments, and so you need to have that trust. And people make decisions on who they're going to invest with, who they're going to buy from, when there is an element of trust and relationship. And then the third thing is to repurpose the content. So, a huge missed opportunity that most podcast guests and hosts overlook is you can take this piece of content and you were just telling me right before we were recording, like, this will be up on social media, on YouTube, on all the podcast platforms, and that is the correct way to leverage podcasting. And so I love that you're doing that as a host. And then for guests, take that content, the host is going to give you a link to the episode when it goes live, give you the assets, put it on your pages, put it on your website, send it out to your list, like leverage the interviews, leverage the content and use it across your marketing. So don't just think I'm going to do an interview and then see what happens. take that content. Look at this as a content creation hour, not just like a one-time visibility opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree with that. I think to your point, if you shoot a 60-minute episode or a 30-minute episode, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to pull out some 60-second segments that you can, like you said, repurpose all over social media. There's even some really cool AI tools now like Opus.pro that make creating those shorts extremely easy. With that, you just feed it a YouTube link. It'll give you suggestions on about, probably one 60-second short for every 3 minutes of footage, and it'll edit it all together for you and make it really easy to get those shorts out there. So yeah,
Yeah.
love what you're saying there.
I'm a huge fan of
Uh,
Opus Clip as well. I started using that. I was using a different software before, and then somebody told me about Opus, and I'm like, "Oh, this is way better. It's less expensive, and it's I like it because it gives you the scores. It'll tell you this one has a really good hook, which is something that's important, especially with short form content. Someone's only going to keep watching it if you get their attention within a few seconds. And so I
yeah.
love that it gives you that score, and you can upload. Now getting into like some repurposing ideas, but if your audience likes actionable advice, you could take a transcript from a podcast, put it in ChatGPT and say, give me 10 quotes from this episode that I could post on social media. And there you got a whole bunch of content that you can post.
Oh, I love that. That's another, yeah, that's really good. Okay, so let's talk about how we go about getting ourselves on good podcasts.
Yeah. So podcast hosts, it's just like when you're showing up into a networking opportunity or going to a conference, an event, there's a first impression that happens. Somebody looks at you and they're going to make a first impression. Everyone does it. Everyone judges based off of how you look or how you approach, like what your energy is in the room. And so podcast hosts are going to do the same thing. They're going to look at your online presence. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look at your social media pages, your following. They're going to look at all of that. And it's going to give them a first impression. And so, number one, kind of when you're going to get on really good podcast, you need to have a media kit and a one sheet. That's first and foremost. If you're trying to get on podcasts and you have no media kit, you have no one sheet, you're not prepared. Like you're already starting off 1 foot behind. So have a one sheet, have a media kit, have a press page on your website. You need to show the podcast host that you are ready for visibility and that you are going to make their job easier. They want to have some questions prepared. Like if you go to a podcast host and you're like, I want to be on your show, but you don't have a one sheet, you don't have topics and questions, you're basically asking that host to do more work to give you visibility. Make their job as easy as possible, and it will be easier for them to say yes to having you on the show.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And I think maybe that sounds intimidating to people. But to give a little bit of perspective, like me as a podcast host, I'm always looking for guests. So anybody that hosts a podcast, they're always looking for guests. And if you can, to Jessica's point, create a one sheet, and that one sheet could just simply be, a short bio, a few topic ideas that you can speak on, and then maybe you could fill in some gaps on that. But just it's literally like a one piece page of paper, created on Canva so it looks pretty. Or if you're not design skills, hire someone on Fiverr or Upwork to put it together for you. But what else would we want to put on our one page to kind of stand out and hook
Yeah.
people?
I mean, yeah, you gave a lot of great, the basic outline, right? Your bio, the bio should be written in third person and kind of short enough so the host could easily read it as the introduction. And I just want to say, you can also update your one sheet throughout the process. Like my team books me on podcasts. And I just said to my booking agent, I'm like, hey, let's rework my bio a little bit. Let's ask ChatGPT how to write this in a way that's easier to read out loud. Because you have to think about the fact that hosts are going to read this out loud as your intro. So it needs to be easy to read out loud. Your topics need to kind of showcase to the host what type of value do you have to offer to the audience. It has to show that you understand what their audience's challenges are and how you could solve them. And the questions are basically like word for word, what could a host read to help kind of guide and facilitate the interview. The most important thing here is don't make the topics and questions self-serving. These should not be about like why you're the best. And this is not an infomercial. This is you giving value to the audience. So that's the one sheet. And then have a media kit. So the media kit is a fancy way of saying a folder, a Drive folder, Google Drive folder, Dropbox folder. be a page on your website. It has the one sheet, it has some headshots because the hosts are going to need a photo to put on like the graphic for the episode. A short and a long bio. It's good to give hosts like two versions because maybe they want a longer bio for the episode description, and then some links to previous interviews you've done. Maybe they want to listen to another interview you did to prepare. Maybe anything else you want to have in there, a copy of your book, anything that you'd want the host to have, put it in a folder that the host can get everything that they need for the interview.
Yeah, no, I love that. And if you guys want an example one, I actually have one on my website. It's olivergraf.tv. You can go under the Book Me tab, and there's my whole media kit and the thing that I send to people when I want to get on podcasts. So if you guys want to reference, but yeah, just it's basically like a resume without being as formal as a resume. Bio, keep it short and sweet, things that you can speak on, other podcasts that you've done, or stages you've spoken on, or anything that you can highlight, and then any awards you've won, anything like that that just enhances your credibility. And then to Jessica's point, bundling that with a media kit folder so that people have access to those other extra bonus items, including the photos and whatnot.
Yeah, and then just in regards to like, okay, you've got the media kit, you've got the one sheet. How do we actually get booked? I talked about like your online presence. That's going to be this one sheet, and your media kit are going to be the first impression. And if they like all that, they're going to then, okay, go to your website and go to your social media. Now, I want to talk a little bit about like you were talking about, like, how do we get on big podcasts, top podcasts? There's a big range of shows out there. I've been booking interviews for 11 years. When I first started, there were a couple 100,000 podcasts total in the world, and now there's over 3 million. So there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's shows with no listeners, there's shows with millions of listeners, right? And so there's a big range out there. The bigger the podcast, the more they're going to want to have a guest on that is also going to help build the audience, right? They've gotten their audience to be a certain size. And if they're going to bring a guest on, they would like typically to see a guest that also has a following, maybe roughly the same size as theirs. Of course, that's not a blanket black and white rule, but typically the larger the show, the more they're going to want to have guests on who also are bringing a pretty significant following. That's how they grow, right? Um, yeah, I don't know if you wanted
Yeah.
to add anything to
Yeah, I
that.
definitely agree with that. And some people get intimidated by trying to go for bigger shows, and that's okay. You can work your way up to that. To Jessica's point, like there's a wide range of shows that you can get on, and some of the smaller ones, those are going to be really easy to get on, and use those as like your practice episodes to work out the kinks, work out the things you're talking about, your topics, and then also look at those, like you were saying, as content creation opportunities, right? If you're talking with someone for 30 minutes to an hour, even if it gets no views on their platforms, share it on your platforms, chop it up into shorts and share those on your platforms, and just really kind of build that flywheel of content. Now you have, content for your website that you can put on there. Just anything, all these things add up and increase your credibility to ultimately the people that are searching you out online.
I love that. And I love that you pointed out like a small podcast is a great way to hone your message, to practice, really work out the kinks, use it as content that you can use on your own platforms. And it's most important with podcast guesting and podcasting, just know what your goal is. What is your goal for podcasting and podcast guesting? What types of people do you need to be speaking with? For a lot of people in business, real estate investors, you really want to use this as a networking strategy. You're looking to make really specific connections with people that are going to move the needle. Like one of our clients, had a listener that reached out and made a six-figure investment in his company. Like you were mentioning before, like you've had deals come through these podcast interview conversations. And so it's not necessarily like in this type of industry that we're speaking to in real estate, you don't really need the masses to know about you, right? Like if I've had calls with people that have like a very low ticket kind of consumer offer. They're going to need a really big audience for a podcast to move the needle with their sales. When you're doing real estate investing, one listener could invest with you and that would make a huge difference. Like that would move the needle in a really big way. So it's important to know what are your goals and what types of shows do you need to be a guest on in order to meet that goal? Because bigger isn't always better depending on what your business is.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that perspective. So now let's talk about the how to. How do we go about what's the first step in getting on these podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, you got to pitch. It's all about being aggressive and reaching out. I mean, transparently, this is the service we provide, but pitching is something we've been doing for a long time. It's a volume play. I mean, our team pitches thousands of podcasts every single month because I mean, as a host, I'm sure you get pitched every single day of people that want to be on your show, and it's great because you're like, I need guests, and these people want to be on the show. So there's like a very much a revolving door of pitches and people getting booked and things like that. So it does take a lot of output to secure the interviews, which going back to the conversation about like top podcasts, consistency is everything. So if you're only pitching like top tier shows with millions of listeners, you're maybe would book maybe an interview in the whole year if you're lucky because those shows are not as open to pitches, especially if you're not
Yep.
bringing that the equal following size. So you want to be getting a lot of pitches out, which is why I really recommend working with a company that can do that for you, like Interview Connections, not to be too pitchy, but as a real estate investor, real estate broker owner, your time is worth a lot. So it is going to take having somebody on your team that is going to be sending out those pitches and crafting a pitch that communicates to the host the value that you are going to bring. I was just talking with our booking team yesterday and asking them, what are you guys seeing? What types of pitches are our hosts responding well to? And what they told me is that there are kind of the left brain and the right brain people. So the left brain, like, investors, people that are talking about like, numbers and like kind of hardcore business topics versus the coaches and the transformation people and the spiritual people. If you're kind of, and I know we're more on the left brain type here, like short bullet pointed pitches, like get to the point. What's the topic? What's the actionable advice? Like, what's the listener going to learn? That's what's going to work well for your type of business. For the other industries that are more kind of like, a little bit more flowy, it's really about the story. And story is still important, and you still need to have an element of your story in there. But I mean, look at this interview; it's a perfect example of like we're right down to okay, what are the steps? How do we do this? Why? Like, so you need to know your audience and what they respond well to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to also point out Jessica provides this as a service. So those that really want to take their podcasting to the next level, you can always hire an agent to go out and find podcast appearances for you. And then for those of us that don't have the budget for that or want to try it themselves first, what is the method of outreach? Is it just finding someone, finding the host's email and emailing them, or what are you seeing kind of works best? Hey there, I just have a quick favor to ask. If you're getting value from Founders Club and you're watching on YouTube, just give us a like, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. These things are free to do and it really helps the channel. And it also helps us be able to bring better guests for you in the future. Now back to the episode.
Yeah. So for those of you that, don't have the budget or you want to kind of try this on your own first, like here are the steps that I would take. I would research and find the shows. There's a site we use in the agency called Listen Notes. Listen Notes, it's a really great directory of podcasts. And there's also a site called Rephonic, Rephonic, Rephonic. So either of those two sites, they're great directories. I think Raphonic, you have to pay to use it. Listen Notes, there's, I think, a free level that you can go and research. So use one of those sites to find interview based podcasts in your industry that would be a good fit for you that are currently publishing. And then for the most part, it's email. Our team, they're doing all their pitching on email. If you're doing it on your own, it's lower volume. You're not pitching hundreds of clients. I would do LinkedIn. I would reach out on LinkedIn if I were you, if I were doing this just on my own for myself and just wanted to kind of get some bookings on my own. I would make a connection request on LinkedIn. I would add a note. I would listen to their podcast first and get a little bit of an idea of who they are. I would make a genuine connection on LinkedIn saying, I listened to your podcast. I really like it. I would love to recommend myself as a guest. Can I email you my one sheet so you can take a look and see if it would be a good fit? That's the method I would use if I were doing this just on my own.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I would agree because I get probably at least one a day, a person pitching me to be on this podcast, and the ones that take that extra step of like, hey, I watched your interview with Robert Kiyosaki or whatever, and whether it's true or not, they could be blowing smoke, but those ones always tend to get my attention. better than the ones that just come in cold with the like, "Hey, I want to be on your podcast." So making that little adjustment, I think, is a great tip up front, and then also checking those directories that you mentioned, because any way that you can get to the contact information easier, I think, is a huge win.
I mean, it's the old sales tactic, not tactic, but lesson of build yeses. So, if you can get permission to suggest yourself as a guest, if they say yes, then you've got one foot in the door. But if you pitch, maybe they're not open to pitches, maybe they're booked out, maybe, you don't know what email to use. Like if you do that, maybe they'll say, yeah, actually send it to my assistant and then she'll read it over and let me know if it's a fit. So I really like that methodology if you're doing this like just for yourself.
And also to add to your LinkedIn tip, I've had really good results on Instagram. I just slide
That
in the
too.
DMs and
Yep.
I do a short little pitch, and that usually gets their attention because, unless they're huge, most people don't get a ton of DMs.
Yeah.
So when they see that come through and it's like a concise, strong pitch, that could be a great way. And to Jessica's point earlier, now they can see my social media, they can see my short clips, they can see my full episode, they can kind of look at my bio and all that. And then that just further sells everything as it starts to build on top of each other.
I love that. Yeah, and I mean, I've seen people be able to get themselves on some bigger shows because they take that time to really nurture and get on the radar of those big podcasts. And I mean, like if there are big podcasts that you really want to be a guest on, I don't recommend pay to play. Like I don't think you can just pay a host to have you on the show, but if they have a community, maybe they have a mastermind group, they've got a coaching program, if it would change the game for you to be on their show, it wouldn't hurt to make a little investment in being their client first. Like one of the biggest shows I've been on, was Ambition Radio with Allie Brown, and, I was her coaching client. Like, I've paid her well over 6 figures. I didn't pay her 6 figures to be on her podcast, but through that, she's like, "Come on my podcast."
Yeah.
So, people wanna feel like you're investing in them if they're going to invest the time to have you on their show.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And then since it just came up, why don't you bring up the difference between kind of pay to play and getting on for free? Because I know
Yeah,
that I would say in the vast majority of cases, it's going to be free, probably 80%, but
for
there
sure.
are the 20% pay to play kind of options. So why don't you kind of walk us
Yeah.
through that a little bit?
Certainly. Yeah, we like as an agency, we don't book on any podcast that charge the guest. I'm not a fan of that model because there's usually not transparency to the audience that the guest has paid for that interview. It's a
Mhm.
totally different thing if it's a sponsored episode. It's very clear, just like in a newspaper. If it's a whole article, but it says sponsored or, advertisement, the reader knows, okay, this company paid to have this article here. So I think from a consumer standpoint, it's really important to have that transparency to know if there was just pure trust in the value that the guest has, or was there money exchanged. Now some podcast hosts are creating and looking for opportunities. If they've got hundreds of people wanting to be on their show, it does look like a nice payday to start charging a fraction of them to have on their show. And so that is starting to happen. I have a friend in the podcast PR space that primarily works with top tier shows, and she does not do any pay to play. They don't do any pay to play. So it is a small percentage of shows that are doing it, but it is becoming a little bit more common as hosts see, maybe some of these people that want to be on my show will pay to be here.
Yeah, and it's generally the really, really big ones that will do
Right.
that, not the smaller kinda easier ones that we've been talking about. Um, cool. So then I would also agree, I don't ever do pay to play, I don't ever pay guests to be on. I think,
Mhm.
to your point, I like the transparency, and I like it to just feel more organic and natural. Back to the networking component, I think that those that see the value, they just see the value in it.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about how to pick the right podcast to be on? Because obviously, if you're in the real estate business and you get on a car racing podcast, I don't know that that's the best fit. So why don't we talk about that for a little bit?
Absolutely. So you have to know. So we talked a little bit about the importance of knowing what your goals are for podcast guesting and then who's the target audience that you need to reach in order to meet that goal? Like, what is, if your goal is to just really build your thought leadership, like you are, I've talked with real estate investors who are like, I've got 40 plus years of experience. I've done all of this in deals and done incredible things, but not many people know who I am. They feel like the best kept secret. For them, it's really just about getting on a lot of real estate and entrepreneurial and business shows to share their story, to share their expertise. And instead of just being this secret authority, being an influencer and somebody who is a leader and has real value that most people just haven't, if they don't meet them or haven't worked with them, they don't know. So if your goal is generally to build your thought leadership, to bring more visibility to the authority that you have, then get on relevant podcasts to business owners, to investors in the real estate market where you can share that and have content that's going to elevate your positioning online.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's good. And we talk a lot about kind of knowing your ideal customer and your customer avatar, and really just that's how you reverse engineer it, right? If you're trying to get into um, the San Diego real estate market, you can get on real estate shows and that's great, but you can also get on San Diego shows. There's lots of like hidden gems in San Diego type podcasts or neighborhood podcasts or any of that kind of stuff. I know a lot of agents, they'll do like garage sales. There's garage sailing and yard sailing podcasts. So there's really, when you start to get creative and think about just where does my ideal customer listen and watch podcasts, and then
Mhm.
reverse engineer it from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, podcast guesting, it's a little bit more difficult to target geographically. But especially if you're doing this on your own, you can really get into like what are the podcasts that are being produced in your area. From that standpoint, look at it as a networking strategy. If you're in San Diego and there's a podcast hosted by a business owner in San Diego, maybe it's not a real estate podcast, but building a connection with that mortgage broker or something like that, like somebody that you would get a lot of referrals from. Look at this as a strategic networking opportunity.
Yeah, totally agree. And those podcasts are very easy to get on. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like send them an
Small
email
local
and you're
shows.
probably you're
Yeah.
probably on.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
Okay, cool. So now let's assume we've been invited to be on a podcast. We're going to go on. What makes a good podcast appearance, and how should we be preparing? Pardon the quick interruption, but if you're looking for a little extra help growing your real estate business, make sure you hit the link in the description below to book a one-on-one consulting session where I will personally help you take your real estate business to the next level. Over the last 15 years, I've grown a brokerage to over 1,000 agents in multiple states, consistently doing over 4 billion a year in sales, and we've been on the Inc. 500 5 times. I would love to personally help you reach your business goals and have the best year you've ever had. Book your session today, and now back to the podcast.
Yeah. So, what makes a good podcast appearance is, a guest that is going to show up. They're going to know their stuff. They're going to know their answers. They're confident. They've got good lighting. They've got a microphone. Like, you need to come to the show ready to give value. You understand who the audience of the podcast is. That's really important because it can help kind of tailor the messaging. Obviously, on this show, we're talking about real estate brokers and real estate investors, like just tailoring the content a little bit. That is something that the market wants more of. People want more niche content. They want to feel like what you're saying is especially made for them. Um, Stories are really big. But again, going back to when we were talking about the left brain, right brain, you got to know your market. There's going to be shows that are very actionable. They want advice, like let's do the how to, the why, what do we do here? How do we do this? So there's like maybe less stories in those episodes, but you might be on different podcasts where it's very story driven and just very kind of like a fluid conversation. And so you need to be able to adapt and read the room and respond to kind of how the host likes to run their show.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And then just like you were saying, just share your expertise and without, you don't want to be bragging. You don't want to be like, look at me. It's very just adding value, adding to the conversation, being organic, being authentic. I think another thing you just brought up too is like, what sort of a setup should they have? because you can obviously just do this off your laptop with the camera that comes installed and the microphone that comes installed. But if you want to continue to do this and really kind of get better exposure, produce better content, investing in probably a good webcam and good microphone and good lighting, to your point, probably makes a lot of sense. So what should we be putting together for an ideal setup, and how
Yeah.
much do you think that would be as an investment?
Yeah. So for a podcast guest, so if you're guesting, you don't have your own show yet, you can have a setup that looks great for very inexpensive. So this microphone that I've been using for years, I love it. It's the ATR Audio Technica 2100. I think it's in the neighborhood of 80 to $100 on Amazon. And then you can go upwards to a Shure SHURE, which is a really top level microphone for like 250, both, USB capabilities. You could plug it right into your computer. So those are two microphone options. And then having some type of ring light or panel light where it's really nice, clean, even lighting. So many podcasts are on video. I've got for those of you watching the video, this is an example of a light. It's USB, can plug it right into my computer or an outlet. And again, it's just a very nice kind of panel lighting so that it looks good on video. And then you can play around with headphones. I use headphones sometimes. I took the headphones off of this because we were getting an echo. That's a good little tip in the green room. Work things out, work out the kinks so that way you can have a great interview.
Yeah, love that. So yeah, so it doesn't have to be very expensive. To Jessica's point, everything's available on Amazon. I think now they even have like beginner podcast kits,
Yeah.
so you can just get a whole kit. Maybe it'll cost you $100 for a good mic, a light, and a webcam, and then you can obviously upgrade from there as you see fit. But highly recommend that as well, because to the point of repurposing the episode and creating as much content out of that one piece of content as possible, having that higher quality definitely makes a difference.
Yeah,
Um,
listeners want good sound quality and video quality as well. Like sound and video are something that is really being elevated. I always look at, the top tier podcasts that have really big budgets from these companies. Like, what are they doing? And that's a way to kind of look ahead and see how do we, as business owner driven podcasts can adapt. And they're all like look at all of the big podcasts. They've got these studios, video setups. It's the whole nine yards. And so as business owners, we need to kind of elevate our game. And it's not very expensive. I mean, I even have this little lapel microphone. Again, it's USB, but it sounds great. It's like $25 on Amazon. Like you don't have to spend a lot of money to have a really decent setup.
yeah, yeah, totally agree. Okay, so let's talk about turning our podcast appearances and exposure into leads. What's the best method of that? And I think, just to kick it off, I think one thing is having something of value that you can give away for free.
Yes.
Right? I know that, and on that note, I know that you have a free giveaway. So why
Yeah.
don't you talk about that, and then we can relate that back to how people can generate leads from the exposure they're getting.
Absolutely. I will lead by example and demonstrate what you should do on your podcast. So, if you're getting interviewed on podcasts, you want to be interviewed on podcasts and you really want to make sure that you're prepared and you're making the most of the interviews before, during and after the interview, I have a checklist, a preparation checklist at interviewconnections.com/prep. If you go there, you can easily download this PDF and have all of the items that we recommend to all of our clients of how to be prepared for your interviews and make the most of the appearances. That is an example of how to generate leads
Yep.
from your podcast appearances. You have a free offer, a free gift that ties back to the conversation. Like anyone who's listening to this conversation and interested in podcasting and wants to learn how to do it, how to do it effectively, they're going to get value in that PDF. And so I give a simple landing page, an easy to remember URL. You're not going to question how do I spell interviewconnections.com/prep. There's no question about it. It'll be in the show notes. And so giving a free offer, a landing page where listeners can go and opt in, because most of the listeners are meeting you for the first time. They don't know you yet. So they might not be ready to write a check or do a big
Yeah.
wire transfer or sign a contract. But if they liked the content, they want to follow you. They want to get more information from you. So give them an easy way to stay connected with you.
Yeah, totally agree. You saw it there in real time. It was very organic. I think that, back to the real estate example, if you're on San Diego's best food type show, you can just throw out a free, a home buyer report or neighborhood guide or whatever it is. Or if it's an investing show, seven best markets to invest in, or look at this new project we're building, or anything that fits your business that has value that you can give away for free, or someone can just opt in with a name and an email to receive it. Now that person is on your email list and you can continue to follow up with them.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Cool. And then how can guests promote their podcast effectively or their
Yeah, so
appearance effectively?
again, like, this is where so many people miss the mark because they do the interview and they think that the host is gonna do all the promoting, when in reality, if the host and the guest are equally promoting the episode on their respective platforms, there's gonna be twice the number of listeners who actually tune into the episode. So you should be promoting it across your social media using a tool like Opus Pro to put clips and create clips from the episode that you can upload because social media love short form video content. People have a very short attention span on social media. So you want to use short form clips from the interview on social and then drive it back. You can, again, like I said, get the transcript of the interview, put it in ChatGPT and ask for some clips, use that as a written post, and then link back to the interview. You can use it with your email list. Like before I've had a masterclass or an event, I have sent out a podcast appearance to my list and said, "Hey, I would love for you to check this out before we meet next week, before you come to my event next week." And that's a way to nurture your audience and engage your audience. You can send it to your leads and prospects directly. So if you're a real estate agent, a broker, and maybe you're meeting with some potential clients, you could text them a link to a podcast appearance. Let them get to know you and see your I know some people will meet with a few different realtors to see who they, resonate most with, who's going to bring them the most value. If you're showing your clients and prospects that you're an authority and a leader in the real estate industry nationwide, they're going to feel super excited to work with you and have you represent them. So send this to your prospects. Make sure that your audience knows that you're out there being an in demand expert.
Yeah, I love that. And to your point on the Chat GPT thing, I never even thought about that, but that's brilliant. Just you can get the episode transcribed, drop it in there, and you could say, "Give me 5 quotes from this episode. Create 5 social media posts for this episode. Create a blog post for this episode. Create an email to promote this episode." And all of a sudden, you'll have an arsenal of things that you can use to promote that one piece of content and kind of maximize it across the board.
I love ChatGPT.
Same, same. Um, on that note, as we start to wrap up here, any tools and softwares that you recommend to kind of help with this, or that you think are or necessary or helpful?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of them, but just for folks that are like, okay, let me make sure I write all these down. So Listen Notes and Rephonic are two websites that you can use to find podcasts. Tools, leverage an agency, interviewconnections.com is if you want to work with our company to get booked. Canva, you mentioned that. I mean, we make one sheets for our clients, but if you're, not looking to hire this out right now, you can use Canva for a one sheet template. Use ChatGPT, like just type up your bio, maybe put your bio from LinkedIn into ChatGPT and say, "Can you rewrite this as a podcast bio?" Like you can ask ChatGPT to help you with a lot of this stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
those are some of the main things.
definitely. Okay, cool. And then in 60 seconds or less, what does it take to be successful at podcasting?
Okay, in 60 seconds or less, what it takes to be successful at podcast casting is stick with it long term. That's really it. There's a lot of tactics, there's a lot of strategies, but most people don't succeed because they just give up and they think that it's going to work for them overnight or within a month, 3 months, 6 months. This is a long-term strategy. It's a slow burn. When you stick with it long term, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, I love that. I'll totally second that. And set yourself a simple goal, right? You don't need to go out there and be on 100 podcasts, but can you set a goal to be on one podcast a month, one podcast a quarter, and then just kind of like take that and start building upon it and building upon it, and that'll drive your whole content plan. It'll bring all the value that we've been talking about. So I love that. For those that are interested in having you help with bookings, like what does that look like? What is the cost involved in hiring an agent like yourself? And what do
Yeah,
you guys do?
so I mean, we work with clients. Like our minimum engagement is our Amplified Authority program, which is a package of 30 bookings. Right now, it's about 17K, depending on when someone hears this episode. Of course, that might change, but that's roughly the investment. We do payment plans. So if you are looking to work with us, it's very comprehensive too. Like all the advice that I'm giving in this episode, we dive in. Like we go through that in detail with our clients. So we're not just pitching and booking you, we're also supporting you, doing interview audits, like really holding your hand to make sure you're seeing an ROI from your podcast appearances. So if you want to, book a call with me or my team, you could do that at interviewconnections.com.
Awesome. Love that. Yeah. And whether you want to go big and hire someone or try it on your own and just get your big toe in the pool, it's something that you should definitely start doing. Get out there, get on more podcasts, make more appearances, kind of build your brand, show your value, and build your business in a way that is really cost effective and free. And if you just happen to hit on something that goes viral, I mean, that could be a huge needle mover for your business. So thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it. For anyone that wants to check out her and her stuff, or at least get the freebie, go to interviewconnections.com. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I mean, thanks for having me. There was so much actionable advice in this episode. So I hope everyone loved it. Yeah, and you can get that prep checklist at interviewconnections.com/prep.
Awesome. And as always, guys, check out the links in the description below. And if you like money and you like real estate, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.